Hey guys, today I'm going to be reacting to Salmonella's South Sudan episode. I have a vague history on the topic. However, I do know a lot about ethnic conflicts when in regards to other British colonies. So here I go. Haven't seen this video in probably 2-3 years. So frankly, do not know what to expect.
Hey kids, today I'm going to talk about South Sudan. It's the newest country in the world, becoming fully independent just in 2011. So I'm going to explain why the state came into being and what it's like there today. So to understand why South Sudan exists, you kind of have to know a bit about Sudan as a whole. So before 1956,
So prior to Sudanese independence, the British were the main colonial power in charge of Sudan. And because of how vast the British Empire was, the British simply did not have the resources nor the men to directly rule their colonies. There's the old saying that the sun never sets on the British Empire. So instead they used the term or the tactic called divide and rule. So divide and rule is honestly a pretty simple concept. So the British and other European powers would find two opposing ethnic groups, which they would then pin against each other. For instance, in Sri Lanka, they had the Sinhalese and the Tamils. In India, there was the Hindus and the Muslims. And in Sudan, they pinned the Christians and the Muslims against each other, with the Muslims being the north and the Christians being the south. And the Christians were not alone, they also had a lot of native African groups within the south. But the simpler way to think about it is Muslim north and Christian south.
Sudan was under the joint control of Egypt and Britain. At the end of 1955, they gave a declaration of independence and became their own thing. The independence movement, however, was led by the
So, despite being a predominantly Christian nation, the British heavily invested in the Muslim North, which led to the northern region of the country to be just stronger economically and politically. Most of the people in the federal government were of Muslim origin and from the north. So, what you saw was that the South Sudan was, in a lot of ways, very underappreciated by their federal government, and there was just no economic development in the region, which obviously would just infuriate the Sudanese, which would only become worse after the British left the country.
guy, Ismail al-Azari, and he was like, hey everybody, we are an Arab-oriented Muslim nation. But then like 8 million
So what this means is Al-Sari transforms in what was a semi-free country religiously under the British into a Muslim theocratic state which uses Sharia law. Obviously, this would anger the Christians because they don't believe in Sharia law. This completely contradicts what it means to be a Christian. So this is the state directly interfering with their right to freely express their religion. This is added with the fact that the North is richer and simultaneously non-Muslims in Sudan under al-Shari's regime were being stripped of their political rights. So civil war almost seems inevitable in these circumstances, which is honestly understandable. You're having your federal government directly interfere with your rights which were there for centuries prior.
These black people were like, whoa now, hold your camels, Ishmael. Us Africans, we ain't all about your Allah. He was like, yeah, well, who cares? Oh, I see. So they got into a civil war between the primarily Arab Muslim North and the traditionally oriented African South. That went on for 16 years until finally the North's like, alright, fine, you can do.
So imagine a 16-year civil war. That is insane. That is crazy. I couldn't even wrap my head around that. The American Civil War still has scars to this day, and that was only from 1861 to 1865. Insane stuff.
Thing. Like you're still part of Sudan, but you can govern yourself for the most part. We'll take our falafels elsewhere. And that peace treaty lasted 11 years from 1972 to 1983. Eventually,
Sorry, I keep stopping, but I have to just add some stuff here. I just want to give more historical context behind this. But the compromise that the Sudanese government came up with was very similar to the deal struck with other former British colonies that used divide and rule. India obviously split into two countries when India and Pakistan was split, and later Bangladesh, they split from Pakistan as well and became an independent state. The Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, they briefly created the independent Tamil state of Elam in northern Sri Lanka because that was the primarily Tamil region of Sri Lanka. So you see here these oppressed ethnic minorities that either want to have complete independence or a federal model so that they can have some sort of self rule. So it's good to remember that when you have ethnic minorities who have the majority in certain regions of a country, but they have the minority in the country as a whole, it's always almost more advantageous to have some sort of federal system so they have more local autonomy and they don't see the federal government as imposing their will of the majority on the minority.
South was like, well, things aren't that bad now, but the Arabs still technically control us, so it could get worse. And I'm not in the mood for any Sharia law anytime soon, so we should probably go back to fighting. So then there was another civil war, which was basically a continuation of the first one, and that ran on from 1983 all the way to 2005, when finally the two sides made a comprehensive peace agreement, which led to South Sudan becoming totally self-governing in 2006.
So, as a devout Christian, prior to his election in 2000, George Bush actually made it one of his top priorities to create peace in Sudan. And by most calculations, as you can probably see, they gained full autonomy in 2006. He actually kind of accomplished this. Obviously, South Sudan is a very impoverished country, but having local autonomy over the religious majority is huge. But we also have to keep in mind that living in South Sudan sucks. I'm pretty sure you get like a 25% pay bonus for hardship pay if you work at a U.S. embassy in South Sudan. And it honestly might be more. I know some countries that number gets up to like 35%, but this should just show you how hard it is to live in South Sudan, that they literally have to bribe people to even live there if they come from a foreign country.
After 5 more years of fiddling around with paperwork, South Sudan became a fully fledged independent nation in 2011. So notice how there were two civil wars before the South gained independence. I guess you could say, two coups make a Sudan.
What?
So now that they finally got what they want, it must be great to live in South Sudan now, right? No,
It sucks.
not really.
It sucks.
It's actually just about the worst place you could ever choose to live in. Seriously, if somebody gave me the choice of moving to South Sudan or living the rest of my life with my dick inside an anthill, I'd be slathering on the honey before they even finish their sentence. Let me talk about a few reasons South Sudan sucks so bad. First, let me talk about ethnic groups. Europe, as we all know, contains a lot of ethnic groups. Scots, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, Spaniards, Swedes. And those are just the big ones that start with S. There's like 100 others. The same is true with Africa. There are thousands of localized ethnic groups sprinkled all over the continent.
So the sad part about Africa is when negotiating and colonizing the continent during the Berlin Conference, ethnicity really wasn't a consideration by the European powers. This would mean that ethnic groups who literally warred against each other for thousands of years would be put in the same country and expected to call themselves a member of one nationality. Many African scholars actually argue that the nation state itself is Eurocentric and it cannot apply to Africa just because of how different their societies were created. But I digress. I really don't have much of an opinion on that. But you see just ethnic groups across the continent vying for political power. Kenya is an excellent example of this because what happens is that all their political parties, or at least most of them, are ethnically based, meaning that if your ethnic group does not win, you could not get basic government necessities because in a lot of ways you are seen as unloyal to the winners. You're unloyal to the current regime. In many of these countries, Uganda is an example. Kenya is an example. The leader, Liberia as well, the leaders of these countries will intentionally neglect ethnic groups that didn't vote for them, making your ethnicity one of the biggest parts of your life. So you're born into this. You're born into these political parties, and if they don't win, you're pretty much screwed.
Not you could tell from first glance. As such, South Sudan is home to a bunch of different peoples, each with their own languages and customs. And these groups have a long history of disagreeing with each other, like they don't get along much. So that's one thing. Second, remember how South Sudan was at war with the North for basically all of the past half a century? Well, as a result, the whole place is pretty geared for war and not much else. Their infrastructure is abysmal and they've got all these guns just lying around waiting to be shot at something. Third, South Sudan...
So just think about Europe post-World War II and how Europe would have been in shambles for centuries without the aid of the Marshall Plan. And that's what South Sudan is like. There's no hope for foreign investment. There's no hope to have a stabilized economy just because there's nothing there that you can build on. So it makes sense why most of the people there are impoverished. And I'm sure he's about to talk. It looks like those are oil wells. So they're very reliant on oil. Many African countries rely on one natural resource, and their economies fluctuate based on that natural resource, whether that be diamonds, whether that be rubber, whether that be oil. If that natural resource goes downhill, then the whole economy collapses, and that is a very poor way to run a government. Just look at Venezuela, who was completely reliant on oil, and when the price of oil declined, the whole country just went to shit.
Has a bunch of oil reserves in different locations around the nation. And we all know how much people like oil. Everybody wants control of whatever wells they can get. So between these three things, the whole place is basically one big whirlpool of chaos. At any given time, the South Sudan government is at war with at least 7 different armed groups from around the country, each of which is also at war with the other groups. And if that's not
So that's not really unique to South Sudan either. Many developing countries have essentially warlords who have autonomy over certain areas of the country. Afghanistan is an excellent example of this. You had various warlords who essentially had local autonomy over regions where the United States did not have a strong presence. So that's a huge part of foreign policy, and frankly a huge part of nation building in these developing countries is finding the balance between the strong central government and the local autonomy of these warlords. And frankly, we have to cut deals with these warlords sometimes, which is a sad part about foreign policy.
enough of a shitstorm, the government ended up basically splitting in two in 2013. This is what happened. So you've got the president, his name is Salva Kiir, and yes, he does actually wear a hat like this. It was a gift from George Bush, true story. And then the vice
So there you go, George Bush having an influence on South Sudan and giving their president the gay hat. I do remember the gay hat. The gay hat's fucking hilarious.
president. His name is Riek Machar. I'm probably saying those wrong, but it's fine. They don't have internet in South Sudan, so nobody can call me out here. So anyway, Salva Kiir, he's very aware of the fact that the country's in a very precarious spot at the moment. So he starts taking greater control of the government and the military, dismissing old people and installing those that he sees fit. And so Riek Machar, he's like, well, gee whiz, Salva Kiir, for someone who calls himself a president, that's pretty dictatory of you. Well, for someone who calls himself the vice president, that's pretty annoying assholey of you. Sir, all I'm saying is, I'm getting pretty sick of you and that gay hat of yours. I'm not wearing a hat. As president of South Sudan, I order you to put on a hat. Yeah, see? That hat's gay. You're wearing the exact same hat.
Okay, this is pure comedy gold by Salmonella, but I guess I'll add some history to it as well. If I remember correctly, these two came from different ethnic groups, and the president of South Sudan actually asked for Machar to be his VP as a sign of unity between the ethnic groups just because of how many there were. But as you'll probably see, they broke up. And just imagine the president dismissing an entire cabinet of an opposing ethnic group. This would make them feel that you're just being ostracized from society. So it makes sense that South Sudan would have another civil war because of this, especially because the VP also had some ties militarily. And if he has control of parts of the army, well, the parts of the army which align with his ethnic group are going to fight for him. So you're going to have two opposing armies, each representing an ethnic group, trying to vie for political power. This is a trend you see over and over and over. So sorry, but let's get back to the gay hat.
Alright, fuck you, you're out of a job. Wait, what? Yup, you and your whole cabinet, get out. Okay, I made up the part about the hat, but the rest of that is true. Also, I should mention that Kiir and Machar come from two different ethnic groups. See, Kiir is a Dinka, whereas Machar is a Newer, which only heightened the tensions between the two. So after Machar got the boot, he ended up taking a chunk of the military with him, most of which were Newers like him, and they started a rebellion against Kiir's government. This is known as the South Sudan Civil War, and it's still going on to this day. So yeah,
See what I mean? You have the army aligned with one ethnic group and another part of the army aligned with another. And that is just bound for failure. You're going to have a huge, huge ethnic conflict just because of that. Just because of the divide you saw at the presidential level. Frankly, a divide that should have never happened if this man was truly in it for democracy. It should also be noted that after South Sudanese independence, the foreign powers like the United States kind of ignored South Sudan and just let it be on its own, which for a fragile democracy who's been at civil war and has no economic development prospects, that seems like a very poor decision, but I digress.
It up, if you looked up clusterfuck in the dictionary, well, you wouldn't find anything because clusterfuck isn't a real word. But if it was, there would probably be a picture of South Sudan next to it. Seriously, this place makes Hotel Rwanda look like Hotel California. And throughout it all, there's still a bunch of hardworking individuals just trying to make a living, farming or herding or whatever. But the constant warfare makes it so the average person has to live in virtually Stone Age conditions. Which sucks, but, what can you do? So that's the story of the world's new...
So just imagine being a subsistence farmer in South Sudan. Your life sucks. That is horrible. You have to deal with all these decisions that you probably have no idea about just because of how information is passed in the country. But I think that's going to end it today. If you like this video, remember to like and subscribe and let me know if you want more Salmonella content. I'm also working on some original content when it comes to my mini wars series, and I'm going to start a new series called In Defense of. So be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for more reaction videos. Thank you guys.